and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we deploy our Tailwind CSS project to the web so we can share it with the world. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. In the previous 3 lessons, we built a website for the Acme Rockets company using Tailwind CSS. Today we'll make some final adjustments, look at some theme configuration possibilities, and deploy the Acme Rockets website to the web for the world to see. Let's start by changing lesson 4 here in our package.json file to lesson 5. And this starter code is linked in the description where you can get the code from lesson 4, which is what we're starting with today. And now we'll make some changes before we deploy it to the web. Now let's open a terminal window by pressing Control and backtick, or you can go to the terminal menu in VS Code to open a new terminal window as well. And then we're going to type npm run tailwind. You can see we've already set up that script in our package.json. So this is the actual command that it will run when we type that here in our terminal window. So I'll press enter and Tailwind will start to run, and it will be watching our files and compiling them to the style.css file, which is the final file that contains all of the Tailwind classes that we're using. Now I'll close the terminal window. And let's go inside the build directory to our index.html file. From here, I'm using the live server extension for Visual Studio Code, so I'm just going to click Go Live down here in the bottom right, and it's going to launch the website. Now, I want to open DevTools and look at how we're applying some media queries, because I've had some second thoughts about this from what we have applied in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a tall phone like the iPhone. And you can see we're not giving just the full screen to the first section here. We also have the header R rockets down here. So I know I'm not applying a media query exactly the way I wanted to. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and look at our custom media queries. And those are in the Tailwind config file. You can see we have a wide screen and we have a tall screen. And in the last video, I switched the tall screen minimum aspect ratio from 1/2 to 13/20, which is 65%. What I neglected to do was change the min here to a max. And that's because we don't want it to be applied to anything larger than that 13/20 or 65%. So all of the smaller ratios we do want it applied to. So let's go ahead and save this change. And now I'm going to just minimize Visual Studio Code. And let's refresh because that's in the config file. So even though we're using live server, I'm going to hold down Shift and completely refresh so it clears anything that was cached. And here we have a full screen now for our first section, and that's what I want. Let me see if I can make this any larger. Fit to window is 77%. That's better for the iPhone X or iPhone 10. And now we can see each section for this iPhone will of course have its own full page, and you can really tell that with the contact form or of course the very first hero section that we have. And this applies to the other phones we might check as well. So let's look at a different phone that's also like the i12 or iPhone 12 Pro. Here we go. So very similar there. And now if we switch to an iPad, that media query should not apply. And we can try to fit this to the window. It'll make it much smaller, but there we go. So that's what we want in an iPad, where it doesn't take up the full screen and presents itself differently. Of course, the testimonials section is long enough. It does take a full screen. The rockets section does not. The contact us form does, but we can also see the footer there as well. So now I think I'm applying the media query the way I wanted to. And you can, of course, check that. Here it is a 1920 by 1080, essentially a 16 by 9, which is that widescreen. Now it uses the full viewport for that one section, our hero section. So when we go to rockets, it will just be the rockets. And of course, there's room to add more rockets now for the Acme Rocket Company. They wanted to do so. The testimonials, once again, is tall enough to take up more than the screen, and the contact us form fits fairly well. And then we can see that footer, but it doesn't allow it to show there at first because the section takes up the full screen. So just checking those media queries before we go ahead and deploy. And again, you can set those to your preference. Now I'm going to bring Visual Studio Code back up, and I'm going to drag it to the left, and I'll try to get our browser just over here to the right. I'll close DevTools so we can see what we have here. Now this window is just a little bit wider than that media query allows, I think. There we go. That's when it kicks in. So I'll drag it over to this size so we can see what we wanted for the tall screen. Otherwise, it applies more of what we were seeing for an iPad where it fits more than one section. Anytime we see this horizontal rule, that means it's fitting more than one section to that page. So there we go. It kicks in right there. I'll just drag Visual Studio Code over to about that spot. And now, of course, I'm going to press Control B to hide the file tree as well. I want to talk about this content here inside of our tailwind.config.js. I've had some ask because in the docs, it shows this differently. And I'm specifying exactly where the HTML files are, and they're just inside the build folder. And then also inside the build folder, I'm providing a second value here for where the JavaScript files are. You can do this. There is no issue with this whatsoever, but you can also just provide what they show in the docs. So I will change this. And now you can see this is all in one line. And I've got build here, but then I've got a couple of asterisks to say, okay, if there is a folder, look inside of any folder that's in the build directory, and then look for these HTML and JavaScript files. And if we save, and once again, I'll hold down Shift and refresh just to make sure, but let's make sure this is working. Yes, our JavaScript still works, and this is a fairly handy line, but there are some considerations here. And it doesn't hurt to specify like I was before where each is, because if you try to do this with just HTML and you don't have any JavaScript, this isn't going to work so well. Let's go ahead and refresh. And now notice it's not working. It's not applying the CSS at all. And this is essentially our page without any Tailwind applied. So if you're going to do this, it looks like you need to at least have the HTML and another file extension value inside of this curly brace here at the end. So with HTML and JS both in here, it works. With only HTML in here, it doesn't work. Now let's look at what happens if we go ahead and remove the curly braces and we don't tell Tailwind to look for the JavaScript at all, because I was also asked about that. So we can save, we can continue to leave this possible folder here with the two asterisks, and it will still look for all of the HTML files inside of the build directory. So it should still apply here as I refresh and save. But we're not looking for any JavaScript. Now the JavaScript will still work without Tailwind. It doesn't rely on Tailwind to work. However, we do have an issue with the class names. So let me go ahead and click the hamburger menu. Notice the menu drops down, the JavaScript works, but nothing happened to our hamburger menu. And that's not because of the JavaScript. That's because Tailwind doesn't see the class name that's inside of the JavaScript, and it's only inside of the JavaScript. So if I go to the file tree, we open up the main.js file. I'll once again hide the file tree so we can see it. This toggle button class only appears inside of our JavaScript. It is nowhere to be found inside of that HTML file. So let me show this. Go to HTML. And now Control F to search, and I'm going to search for toggle dash button. No results. This class is not listed anywhere inside of the HTML file. It's only applied with JavaScript. And that is why Tailwind needs to see our JavaScript files as well. So once again, you can apply it as the docs show in one line like this. So we're saying look inside of the build directory, then look inside of any other subdirectories, any other subfolders, and then look for HTML and JavaScript files. That's one way to do it. Or you can do it like I did before, and I'll go ahead and continue to undo these changes. And now you see what I previously had. I'm telling Tailwind to look inside of the build directory for the HTML files because that's where I will have them. Then I'm saying look inside of build and the JS directory specifically. So you could say I'm being explicit about where these files are, not their names, because I'm saying look for any JavaScript file or any HTML file. But otherwise, the other way is kind of being implicit. It's saying it can be inside of any directory inside of the build directory. So any nested directory, and then any HTML and JS file, which could be a little bit more flexible, especially if you're working with a bigger directory structure in a project with React and so on. So just some options I wanted to mention there. Now, I've also had a few questions about the theme, and notice here we are extending the theme with this extend object that is nested inside of the theme, before we specify anything. And that's because we don't want to write over anything that's already provided by Tailwind. But it's not that you can't do that. I'm going to go ahead and bring our browser to the full screen, and then we'll look at the Tailwind docs. Notice here for the theme they're providing in their example, and then they say screens. Well, these are the media queries, but they're not extending. They're actually writing over anything Tailwind would already have predefined, and they're providing these. The same with the colors here. So they're giving specific color names, but this would not extend the existing Tailwind colors. This would overwrite any colors that were provided, as it provides a colors object. So you want to be careful when you do that. Likewise, down here for spacing and border radius, they are extending the theme. They're not overriding those, so they're just adding more to it. I do recommend to always extend as you're learning Tailwind, and of course, as you learn it better in the future, you could go ahead and possibly overwrite some of the default themes. But it's better to, of course, extend and not take anything away. You can always extend and add to and just not use those other themes. And if you don't use them in your project, as we see here, then of course Tailwind will not compile those unused classes to the style.css. Let's go ahead and pull this back over and look at Visual Studio Code. And I'll give one example of how you could extend the theme to apply a color. So I'll just say above screens, and remember screens here, we added 2 different media queries, but of course we kept all the default media queries as well. But let's say we want to add a color that we're used to working with. I've used the color Papaya Whip many times, and that is not available in Tailwind. So to add that, I'm going to be inside of this extend object still, and then say colors, and provide my curly braces, and you need a comma after the closing curly brace, not a period, but a comma. There we go. And so for Papaya Whip, let's say I want to give 3 values. I don't want to give the full spectrum like Tailwind does with the values of 50, 100, 200, and so on, but I want to have just a few. So I could say possibly light. And well, first I need to say Papaya Whip. So I almost skipped that part. Papaya Whip, which is a color name in HTML. And then inside of that, I'm going to say light, and then I'm going to give the hexadecimal color. Now I already know this, so I can just type it in, but you could look up the colors you want to add. And then I'm going to provide a default, and this would just be referenced as Papaya Whip. You don't have to say Papaya Whip -default. So this is a keyword inside of Tailwind. And by the way, I said this is a color in HTML, but you could make up your own name. You could make up whatever you want to right here, and then you'll be able to refer to that. So after that, I'm going to provide the actual Papaya Whip hexadecimal. And then I'm going to provide a dark value. So here I'm going to say FEE5BC. Again, these are values I already know. You would have to look up your own that you want to apply. So now I can use any of these 3. And so I would refer to, as the class inside of Tailwind, I would say text-Papaya Whip, and that would give me the default one right here. Or I would say text-Papaya Whip-light, and that would be this color here. Or text-Papaya Whip-dark, and that would be this color. And if we go ahead and just look at an example inside of our file, I'm going to press Alt-Z so these lines wrap. But if I wanted to just add it here in the mobile menu, I'm not going to keep this change. But we'll see these are now added to our IntelliSense. So I'll say text-Papaya Whip, and it also gives me the light and dark options because the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension that we added already picked up on these because it's in our Tailwind config file. So that's very handy if you do want to add colors to your project. So even though we're not using this in our project, I'm going to leave it in here, and this will be in the GitHub repository if you want to refer back to this. Of course, also refer to the docs because you can do this with any type of property you want, including media queries as we've done before. I'll drag this to the left and bring this back over. We'll pull the docs back up, and you can see there's all sorts of things, fonts, border radius, anything you can think of really, you could configure in your theme for your project. And I should also give the reminder as I drag the browser back to the right, that inside of your HTML, and I'll pull this file back up, if you just had one color value you wanted to use one time, remember you can use arbitrary values. So you could have text dash and the arbitrary value goes inside of brackets, and then you could provide that color possibility here. So here we might say FFE FD5, and if I just wanted to use Papaya Whip once, that's how I would do it, and that might be easier than dropping that into your config file. If you just needed to use it once or twice, you might choose to use that arbitrary method instead. So just once again bringing that possibility up. Okay, we're ready to talk about deployment now. And if you do not have Git installed, and if you're not familiar with Git and GitHub, I do have a tutorial for that on my channel. So I will link to that in the description or possibly up here in the video as well. And you'll want to install Git because we will be pushing our code to GitHub with Git, and then we will deploy it from there to render.com. So first of all, Git, and then you'll also need to sign up for a free account at github.com if you do not have that, if you're not familiar with those. I hope you are, but if you're not, remember I have a video that will help you with that. Okay, with both of those in place, let's go ahead and pull Visual Studio Code back into view here. So I'll use the full screen. And once we have that, and here's the file tree, we need to initialize Git. So if I'll collapse all the folders over here, it doesn't look so busy. And I'm going to do Control backtick to go to a terminal again. We've already compiled our CSS, so I'm just going to press Control C to stop Tailwind. So we're no longer compiling, we're not making any further changes. Now we need to initialize Git. To initialize Git, I'm just going to type git, G-I-T, and then init, and press enter. This will turn into a repository on my computer. So now that I have that, I can commit the code to the repository. So I'm first going to add it with git add and a period. Now period means add all files. So make sure you already have a .gitignore file and list your node modules directory in that. And if you do that, you'll see it grayed out over here to the left because we do not want to send the full contents of node modules to GitHub. There's no reason for that. So we'll go ahead and make sure we have that gitignore file with node modules, and then you can add all files with git add and a period, which will add all of the files inside of this directory. Once we've done that, we need to commit the files now with a message. I'll just type git commit -m for message, and I can say first commit and press enter once again. At this point, I need to have created a repository on GitHub. So if we're looking in our browser now at GitHub, I'm just going to click new or new repository, and we can name this, and I'm just going to name this tailwind_tut for now. I'll probably delete this later, but for now, I'll just have tailwind_tut. That will be the name. We could make this public. If you have an account that allows you to make it private, you can make the source code private and then still deploy it. That's fine. I'll just go ahead and do that now because this isn't the repository that I'm going to link to in the description that goes with the rest of the course. So I'm going to have private. You'll probably have public, and that's fine. After that, you just create the repository. So we'll just wait on that. And after it creates the repository, we've already created I said repository, the space for the repository essentially in GitHub. We haven't put it there yet. It says push an existing repository from the command line. So we have an existing repository on our computer. We'll need these 3 lines typed into the terminal. We can copy all 3 by just clicking the little copy button over here. Once we've done that, I'll drag this to the right just to get it out of the way. Look in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go ahead and click this to maximize our terminal so you can see everything. And when I right click, it will paste these commands in. It executed the first 2, and it's just waiting on me to press enter for the last one. Then when I do that, it pushes this code to GitHub in the repository space that we just created on GitHub. Now I'll make this a little smaller again. I could even close it out as we're not going to use that terminal anymore. Drag this over to the left, bring Visual Studio Code back here, and we can scroll up and just click on the title, Tailwind Tut, to make sure our code has been committed. And here we see our commit message, first commit as well. So this is our code. And now with our code on GitHub, we need to go to render.com. That's where we're going to host our site. You can host your website for free at render.com. And to do that, you'll need to sign up. Now I'm already signed up, so I have a dashboard link right here. But you'll want to sign up with your GitHub account, or after you sign up if you don't, or if you've already signed up without your GitHub account, you could then link your GitHub account to your account here at render.com. You may have to verify your email, so go ahead and sign up and then come back to this tutorial. I'm just going to go straight to my dashboard now, and you'll have a dashboard as well after you sign up. And then you'll have a new button when you go to your dashboard. You can see I have a couple of projects here already successfully deployed. Now I'm just going to click New, and we're going to create a static site here. That's what our website is. It's got just a little bit of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Okay, once you've done this and you have connected your GitHub account, as you can see, mine is connected here. If yours is not, you'll probably have a Connect Account button over here, and you can see it supports GitLab as well, which is kind of like GitHub. So if you want to use that, you could, but we're using GitHub, and I've connected that. Once we've done that, I can see my most recent code repo right here, my repository from GitHub at the top of the list. You could search your repositories, but mine's right here. So I'm just going to click Connect. And once we've done that, it's going to pull up this web page here where we need to put in a few settings for our website. So we could name this anything we want to. I'm going to name it Acme-Rockets. And after that, we'll leave the root directory blank here because looking at the root directory is just fine the way it is. Then we'll have the branch, it's main. That's the only branch we gave our repository. The build command, we don't have one for this because it is just a pure static site, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. A React, for example, or Node, we might use a build command, but we're not going to with this site. And then a publish directory. This gives the example of build, and that's exactly what we did. We were compiling our CSS from Tailwind, so it all went into a build directory. So we need to type build in right here. So that's the directory we're going to use to launch our site from. And after that, you just click Create Static Site. We'll get a screen here in just a moment that we can see the progress on, and it will take just a little bit as it goes ahead and builds the site. And when it's finished, we'll get a success message. Okay, just a little bit of time has passed now, and you can see there's several more messages here inside of this window. And now it says your site is live, and that's what we wanted to hear. So it should be ready to go. I'm going to scroll back up to the top, and you can see the web address, the URL for the website now. So you can copy this, or you could just right click and open link in new tab. And let's see the website. Here it is. Now notice we don't have the fave icon yet. So let's see if we can hold down the shift button and refresh to get that fave icon. Not yet, but I think we will soon. So it should go ahead and provide that as well. If not, we need to put that fave icon in the build directory if we didn't. And any change we make, say we would put it in the build directory if we hadn't, we would push that back to GitHub, it will automatically deploy then. And that's an awesome thing about the way this is hooked up with Render. So when we push our code to GitHub, it automatically redeploys our changes over here on render.com. So we can check everything out, but I think it's going to look just fine. This is live on the web now. So there is our full site. Let me once again go ahead and delete the anchor here for the hero and see if we can get that. No, we didn't get that. So let's go ahead and check our Visual Studio Code to see if we even supplied that fave icon inside of the build directory. Here it is, not in the build directory. Let's look in the build directory. It is not there. So let's drag the fave icon into the build directory instead. Now that we've made this change, we could push this change to GitHub. So I'm going to once again, well, first I'll type git status because you can do that to see if there's any changes. And notice it knows the fave icon was deleted from the root directory and now it's added inside of the build directory. So it knows that. So let's just say git add, and I'll just press period instead of typing the specific file name. You could do either. After that, git commit -m, and I'm going to say moved fave icon to build directory. And now git push. So we have pushed those changes. You can close the terminal window. I'll pull Visual Studio Code over here. Let's go back now to our render.com page and let's look at events here. Let's see what happened. So we have our first deploy. The deploy is live. Now a new deploy has started, and we can see the dots over here. So it's underway right now, and you can see the git commit that I put in moved favicon to build directory. So let's check the deploy now, and we can see we're getting this message again. So it's going to take just a little bit. I'll come back to the video when it's complete. Okay, I'm back. It says your site is live again. So we could launch it again from here, but we've already got it open in a separate tab. So I'll just go back. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and reload. And we still didn't get the fave icon. Oh, there we did get it. Okay, so it did pop up there. So now our change is there. That's a very simple change, but now we have the fave icon for the website. So that just shows you how you can make any change to your site, push it back to GitHub, and it will automatically deploy at render.com. Well, congratulations on getting to the end, all the way through our Tailwind CSS series. Now you've built a complete website with Tailwind CSS. So what would be the next step to learn it even better? What I recommend is take another project. Maybe you have built the Little Taco Shop website at the end of my HTML and CSS tutorials. And what I suggest then is taking the Little Taco Shop and switching it over to Tailwind CSS. You now know how to config, as we looked at the theme configuration here. You could put in any specific things you want. You could use arbitrary values, or you can use built-in Tailwind CSS classes as they're already provided. So you can do all of that, and you could create another version of the Little Taco Shop website or any other project that you have created and apply Tailwind CSS to that. And I think it will help you learn Tailwind CSS even better. Again, congratulations on completing the series. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.